another 80s golden age of comedy. I'm your host, Bruce Starr, and we're going to have a great show for you today. Typically, we have stand up comedians, we might have a producer, we might even have agents that talk about what it was like back then. But today is going to be an amazing show. I know it's going to be because I've heard so much about my guest. My guest is a very successful, I'm not even going to say too much about him because I really want him to say what he's all about. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite Carl Gottlieb. Welcome to the show, and thank you for coming on and wanting to share your experience and history with us here on the 80s Golden Age of Comedy.
Happy to be here. The 80s were a golden age, but then so were the 70s and the 60s and the 90s. I mean, it's all a golden age if you've got the gold.
And I love your background. What an incredible picture that is. I see. It looks like the old time New York City.
Yep. This is 52nd Street in Manhattan when it was the jazz capital of the world. But it's 52nd Street between 6th and 7th Avenue in Manhattan. And every jazz club in New York, it seems, was on that street. And it's just filled with all-stars on the marquees.
And the one name that I see that if my mom and dad were watching over this show right now, they would see, look at that, B.S. Pulley. B.S. Pulley's name in lights on this picture. That was the one friend that my parents had in show business was B.S. Pulley. Do you know anything about him at all?
Not at all, except that he was a kind of a trash-talking, irrepressible comic.
Now I know why my parents liked him. And he was in Guys and Dolls, right?
What's that?
He was in Guys and Dolls.
Yes, he played, I think, Harry the Horse.
Now I know why my parents loved him, especially my dad. So, Carl, tell me about you. Tell me about where Carl started from. And
well, I had a lower middle class upbringing in Manhattan. My dad was in the civil service. He was an engineer. My mom was a housewife, and then when my sister and I got old enough to take care of ourselves, she went back into the job market, and she also was in the civil service. And then she went to college and got a degree. And I, like I say, I grew up in Manhattan. I went to grammar school and high school and 2 years of college in Manhattan. And then I got tired of taking public transportation to school, so eventually I had a scholarship and some money saved up, and my parents helped. So I transferred to Syracuse University in 1957. Nice. And then I was Syracuse University class of 59. And then I had to stay an extra semester because when I transferred, I lost some credits. I had to make them up. So I spent another half year, and I was a January graduated. My class was actually January of 60. But when January of 60 came around, it was winter in Syracuse. There was no ceremony. There was no cap and gown. There was no procession. It was just one day I was in school, and the next day I was out. And there was no reason to stick around Syracuse. It was cold. Snow drifts were 8 feet high. And I remember hiking through the snow and saying, well, I guess off to New York now. And I remember at that time, right around either in Syracuse or in New York, as soon as I got there, I kind of made a vow. The only thing I actually thought about when I graduated, my dad, who had wanted to be a civil engineer who built bridges and roads and was out in the field, in the midst of the Depression with a baby on the way, he opted for the civil service because it was safe. And he counseled me, whatever life counseling I got from my dad was do what you want to do. Don't get stuck doing what you don't want to do. Uh, so I said, okay, I'm just going to do what I want to do. And that means since I want to be in show business, because I knew at an early age, I was a writer and I was funny and I had a scholarship for writing, so I knew I had some verbal facility. So I said, you know what? I'm going to only make a living in show business, and I don't care doing what, but I'm not going to be a cab driver or office temp or any of those, you know, interim jobs that you read about. I'm just going to work in show business. And for a long time that meant 25 bucks a week and meals at a Greenwich Village coffee house. And I was a techie at that time. I mean, there was no demand for actors, obviously, as always. And I wasn't a stand-up. I didn't really have a stand-up act. But I knew I could write. So that's and I could do stagecraft. So I was a stage manager, and I earned a living doing that. And I had a college roommate who was my roommate in Greenwich Village when he graduated a few months later. And that was Larry Hankin.
And I had
And
Larry Hankin on the show, and he spoke very highly about you.
yes, well, we had a great time together. And then
Can I share a Larry Hankin story with you that he shared?
please,
So times were thin,
yes,
and there wasn't much money to be made, but you were smart enough to use your writing skills and get jobs reviewing plays or reviewing movies and
right.
for
I
newspapers.
worked as an associate editor for a movie for an exhibitor trade publication, the Independent Film Journal.
Oh,
So
okay.
I was an associate editor of a trade paper that published up in Times Square.
And that meant you went to see plays and movies or whatever
Yeah,
the.
no, but the job description involved, interviewing people who were in town to sell their movie, producers and stars. So there was this like endless parade of luncheons, and I would call Larry. I think this is probably the story he'd tell you. I say, "Okay, Oak Room at the Plaza, wear a necktie, and meet me." And you're with the Paramount Party. So he'd tell them he was with the Paramount Party, and they'd let him in, and then we would stock up on food. He'd put lots of hors d'oeuvres in his pockets for later,
Well,
and
I'll tell you the switch in the story
yeah,
because he said you were the one. What a good heart you are! I like you already. You were the one that stuffed shrimp in your pocket to bring home to
yes,
him to eat.
that too. Yes, of course.
And
Yeah,
then he said there came a time when you said your clothes stunk so much that you couldn't bring shrimp home in the pockets anymore.
yeah, yeah. I would have had to get rubber lined pockets.
What a great story that was.
Yeah.
That's great.
So one thing led to another. I got a job. I was hanging lights and doing sound at a Greenwich Village coffee house, and I met some of my oldest friends in show business. Date back to that time. Fred Willard, I met in those days.
Oh,
Dick Libertini. Some interesting people. Uh, and then uh, then what happened? Then what happened? Oh, yeah, then I got drafted.
oh,
Uh,
no wonder why you didn't want to remember that.
yeah, so I couldn't get a real job of any sort, even as a associate editor of a film magazine, because I would have had to. I had a 1A draft thing. So Larry and I did summer stock theater together that summer, and then when we got back to Manhattan, uh, I had to kind of mark time, and then I got drafted. So I went in the army, and Larry kept the apartment in the village. It was a very cheap place. In those days, you'd get apartments for nothing. and then he got a job at Second City in Chicago.
Yeah.
So he went to, or well, actually, he got a job with something called Compass Theater, which was one of the early improv offshoots that started, excuse me, that started in St. Louis at Gaslight Square, and that was very close to where I was in the Army. So on the weekends, I would go into St. Louis and pretend I wasn't in the Army and hang out with Hankin. So here we are. I'm in the Army in St. Louis. I'm hanging out with Larry Hankin, and I'm in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, which is about 90 miles down the road from St. Louis. But I'm going in on St. Louis every weekend I can get to hang out and pretend I'm not in the Army, watch Larry work at Compass Theater. And then that company folded, and Larry went up to Chicago to be in Second City. And then Alan Meyerson, who was putting together the committee, recruited Larry out of Second City, and he was going to be fired anyway because Viola Spolin, whose son Paul Sills was running Second City at the time, she said, you can't have two tall, funny-looking comics with big noses.
Ah!
So that was Dick Libertini and Larry Hankin. So they kept Dick Libertini and they let Larry go, which was fine because he got hired by Alan Meyerson, joined the committee, and went to San Francisco and opened the committee in April of '63, and they were a huge hit. And while he was becoming a hit in San Francisco, I was doing my Army time. I was in the All-Army Entertainment Contest.
Oh, okay.
I was a finalist. At the end of the All-Army Entertainment Contest, I got some leave time, so I took it and went to San Francisco to see what Larry was doing in the committee, and the committee was a huge hit. I helped them do a road gig, doing what I do, which is stage managing. And they needed a stage manager. They did not have a stage manager. So they said, when are you getting out of the Army? And I said, well, pretty soon. They said, well, you want a job as a stage manager? And I said, yes. So when I got out of the Army, I did a couple of weeks of summer stock, which I needed to do. I owed them that. And then I went to California with my motorcycle and hooked up with the committee as their stage manager. I was their
Very
first
nice.
stage manager
Very nice.
and had a great time. And then the committee, in the meantime, got booked to play on Broadway. So when they played Broadway, I became a director of the interim company because they kept the company open. They didn't close. They hired more actors. So I worked with Avery Schreiber and Dick Shaw and John Brent and Peter Bonners, and I directed that company. And then the Broadway company came back to LA, so I was demoted from director back to stage manager. And I realized it was kind of a dead end because Meyerson and his wife owned the committee, so there was no way to advance beyond director because Alan was the director. And so I had a couple of job offers in New York from when I was there. And so I went back to New York. I worked in New York for a season. I worked for a Broadway producer named Arthur Cantor, who had produced the committee on Broadway and was a Broadway producer himself. And I had an office in the Sardi's building, and I was a company manager for Arthur. He directed a play off Broadway. And then that's when I bought my motorcycle. That's when I sold my first serious journalism. I sold an article to Esquire magazine. I got paid $519.75 for that article.
Wow.
So I bought a motorcycle, and then the committee was auditioning actors, and I helped with the auditions in New York. I helped them set up the New York auditions. And Meyerson was casting the company, and Peter Bonners was going to direct it when they all got back to San Francisco. So I proposed. I said, "Listen, I've done everything else. I've been a stage manager. I've been a director. I helped out in the kitchen and the box office, but I've never been an actor in the company. Although, as stage manager, I performed a little bit in the improvisational role of stage manager,
Okay.
and I got my laughs. So anyway, so I joined the company as an actor with another ex-stage manager, Howard Hessman. We both of us had been stage managers first, then we became act. And that committee company opened in May, I think, of June of '66, and we got very good reviews, and that started me as my career as an improvisational actor. So I was in the committee for a couple of years, and in '68, the
Wow.
company moved to Los Angeles to play on a theater on the Sunset Strip, and I was one of the actors who was picked to go to LA and be in that show.
Wow.
So the committee opened on the Sunset Strip at what was then the Tiffany Theater, and we got rave reviews across the board. The two daily, mass circulation papers, the LA Times, the Herald Examiner gave us a rave review. The Variety and the Hollywood Reporter gave us rave reviews, and the Free Press and the the Avatar, the LA Free Press, which were the underground press. So we had uniform raves from
Wow.
above ground, the trades, and the underground press.
That's
So
excellent, man.
we
That's
were
good.
we were in Fat City, and we were doing the show as a hit, and that's when people started to come by and see the show, like the Smothers Brothers, and the Smothers Brothers had inherited their show, and they wanted new, fresh, young writers, so they hired me and Steve Martin and
Oh.
Bob Einstein and Lorenzo
Oh.
Music and Murray Roman and McLean Stevenson.
Wow.
A really interesting group of writers. We all got our Writers Guild cards on the Smothers Show. Well, first we worked on the Glenn Campbell Summer Show.
Wow.
John Hartford was in that writing company. And then we transitioned to the Winter Smothers Show, and we won an Emmy that year. And the
Wow.
show was canceled. The show
Ah,
was canceled, and then we won an Emmy. So go. Uh, and I got married, and my life changed in multiple ways, and so now I was kind of working in LA as a comic performer and a writer. I was writing sitcoms and unproduced feature films, and just just one thing led to another. I went from one job to the next, and the jobs were real interesting. And one of them was I was working with. I had an agent at that time who believed in hooking his clients up together. He was the early packaging. And that agent was Mike Medavoy, who later
okay.
became
Wow.
head
Great.
of United Artists. Anyway, so Mike put me together with a young director named Steven Spielberg,
Oh.
who had directed the pilot for Murder She Wrote,
Oh.
and Columbo. He had directed the pilot for Columbo, and he was a contract director at Universal, doing stuff at Universal. He had done Duel and Sugarland Express, and
Yeah.
I worked in a couple of his movies as an actor, as an improvisational actor. And then he said, "I'm going to do this movie about a shark. Do you want to come? I'd like you to be in it, so you can improvise and work with. I'm working with a lot of new actors." So I said, "Okay," and again, one thing led to another, and when the dust cleared, I qualified for a screen credit, and I had appeared in the movie Jaws,
Wow.
which obviously is a life changer.
Wow.
So, so then my position in features was secure. And then I did commercials and I did other
Let,
stuff.
let me stop you there because it is so life changing. The part that would really interest me was how how did that whole concept come about? Because that was so different and so life changing and so effective as a film. Tell me about your experience working on that movie.
Well, you got to remember, when I met Steven, he was like the new kid in town. He had directed a very successful television feature called Duel, which was released with great success in Europe, established him as a director in Europe before America. And then he did a picture called Sugarland Express for Zanuck and Brown, starring Goldie Hawn and Bill Paxton.
Oh, wow.
And that was got rave reviews, but did no business.
Huh.
Pauline Kael said it was the most stunning debut film since Citizen Kane,
Wow.
but no made no money. So Steven was looking for a popular success for a popcorn movie, and he was hanging out at Zanuck and Brown's office, and he saw the script for Jaws, and he said, "What's this?" And they said, "Well, it's a novel. It's a hit. It's a best-selling novel." So Steven read the script, which was at that point had been rewritten by Howard Sackler. And then he asked me to take a look at the script and said, see if you can find a part for yourself. It'd be great if you came on location with me and we did this film. And if you're there as an actor, you can improvise and you can work with the local actors. I'm going to be using a lot of, first-time actors. You can help with them. So I found a part in the movie that suited me, and I was cast in that part, Meadows, the publisher. And then I met with Zanuck and Brown and Steven, and they said, we start shooting in 3 weeks. Can you do a rewrite starting immediately? So I said, Steven and I said, yeah, sure. We just, blindly confident. And a day later, I could quit my day job, which was writing for The Odd Couple on ABC.
Oh, wow.
I was story editor on The Odd Couple because that was one of those jobs, funny writing jobs. One led to another. So I went with Steven to Martha's Vineyard to start rewriting Jaws, and that turned into a monumental job. Went over schedule, over budget, all of those things, and eventually my job as a writer was finished because they had no more dialogue to shoot, just fish. So I took my Jaws money, I made very little,
Oh,
but I did make enough to get a new little car. So my wife and I bought a new BMW. I drove it to California, stopped in Nashville to visit with friends who were shooting Nashville at the time.
ah,
I had already done the movie of MASH with Robert Altman in L.A. before.
wow.
Anyway, so we got to L.A. and then eventually Jaws finished up and came home. And then I had a year before Jaws came out.
Wow.
And I had to keep working. So that's when I did the Flip Wilson specials as a writer. And
How
so
was he to work with? How was he to work with? Because I heard, different things that he was kind of difficult.
Flip was difficult. And the first show I worked on, one of the guest stars were Richard Pryor and Lily Tomlin and Peter Sellers.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great. And it was, it was just, it was just great to write for him. But I remember that at the first reading of the script, Flip came in dressed in a lot of bling, which was popular at the time. And the actors are sitting around the table, and Richard Pryor looks up at Flip and says, "Huh, used to be a nigger couldn't wait to get out of chains." And because he had gold, he had like Mr. T kind of bling
Oh my God.
around him. Anyway, the special was good. Lorne was in the process of preparing Saturday Night Live, so he asked me if I would come to New York and work on that movie, on that show. That's the only career decision I ever think about twice, because I said no. I had Flip Wilson shows to do in L.A. and I had other movie possibilities, so I wasn't ready to move to New York because he wanted a senior writer like the part that Herb Sargent played in the first 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I would have been Herb Sargent, but I opted to stay in L.A. And as it turns out, 5 years later, when the whole cast of Saturday Night Live came to L.A. looking for work, I had already done Jaws. I'd done Which Way Is Up with Richard Pryor, so I had my comedy credentials were in order.
Wait. Which Way Is Up? You were one of the writers on Which Way Is Up?
Yes,
Wow.
yes, credited.
Wow.
Yes, if I'm in Jeopardy category, it's um, Which Way Is Up, and then I had done the Jerk with Steve Martin. So that was 70. I don't know when. 76,
I think early 80s, I thought was the joke.
maybe. Anyway, I had a career in features, and in those days, everybody in television wanted to do features, and everybody in features wanted to do rock and roll, and everybody in rock and roll wanted to do television. So go figure. So I had my foot in all these camps, and I was working when I could, and then Jaws came out, and then I did the Jerk. So if I was a Jeopardy category, it would be his hits begin with a J. And Jaws and the Jerk,
Wow.
both in the top 100 AFI films of all time.
I mean, doing such an early film with Steve Martin, who's so brilliant. Tell me about that experience.
Well, that was, Steve. Steve had been spotted and signed to a contract at Paramount to do three movies. He had a 3-picture deal at Paramount. And he had never written a movie, and I had written 2 movies. So he said, maybe, we could write this together. So I said, great. He said, we don't know what it's about, but we got a deal to write a movie, so let's try and think of something.
Wow.
So we did, and that thing eventually became The Jerk. Another writer named Michael Elias worked on it. But when the smoke and dust cleared, I had a story credit and a shared screenplay credit on The Jerk. So,
how'd you get the idea for that? How did that, who said, why don't we do this? Go in that direction.
Good. I'll tell you how that started. Steve and I had an office at Paramount in the Raiders building, which
Nice.
David Picker had set us up with.
Nice.
And in the meantime, I had directed a short subject called The Absent-Minded Waiter with Steve Martin. And David Picker had the very shrewd idea of putting Steve in a feature length, in a 35 millimeter, theatrical short subject, and giving it to the exhibitors for nothing with a big Paramount picture, so that the exhibitors would get used to the idea of Steve being a film actor, not just a successful nightclub act, which is what he was. He was just building. And Picker believed in him. So I directed The Absent-Minded Waiter, which was nominated for an Academy Award later that year. And we started working on a script that was going to become The Jerk. But we didn't know that. All we knew was we had a script to write. So every day we would meet in the writers' building in an office. We had 2 IBM Selectrics and a stack of yellow pads and a cup full of sharpened pencils and a secretary. And we were just looking at each other going, I don't know, what do you think? I don't know, what do you think? And literally weeks went by. And finally Steve said, there's a line in my act that always gets a laugh. Even if the act's not doing well, it's kind of a saver. But it always works. I said, oh, what's that? He says, I was born a poor black child. So we looked at each other and said, okay, what if you were? Really? What would that look like? And then we started writing the first scenes of The Jerk.
Wow.
Where he's sharecropper in the Mississippi Delta with a
Wow.
black family, where he learns he's black, and like I say, one thing led to another, and then so that's how they. And then of course Barry Diller and Mike Eisner came over from ABC to run Paramount,
Wow.
and they didn't see the potential in Steve Martin.
Oh my
They thought it was a
goodness.
waste of money,
Whoa.
so they did not want to produce the movie we wrote together. They wanted it rewritten and wanted it changed, and I didn't want to rewrite it, and I wasn't available. So they got Michael Elias to do the rewrite, and they dropped the project. So David Picker, and they dropped David Picker, which was a mistake. But whenever a new regime comes into a studio,
Right.
they shit can all the old regime's projects. So the Jerk the film that was going to be called The Jerk was shelved, but Picker took it as a negative pickup, and he and Steve and Carl Reiner took it over to Universal and got a deal and got the rights to Absent Minded Waiter, and they told Paramount, you still owe us for 2 scripts. We will let you out of that commitment if you give us this script outright and the short subject, and we walk away from Paramount, and Steve makes his fortune elsewhere, and that's what happened.
Wow. Wow.
So Diller and Eisner dropped Steve just when he was becoming Steve Martin.
Wow. What a great story.
Yeah.
What happened after that? So you're on
Now my resume is complete. I'm getting
exactly.
6 figures for. I'm getting big money for scripts. I'm doing script doctoring jobs. I'm doing well in features. I took a couple of years out to do commercials as a producer. Um, Traveled, went trekking in Nepal,
Wow.
and then when Jaws came out, my life changed again. You know, uh, and that was a total fluke. Nobody expected Jaws to become the success that it did.
I mean, it's got to be one of the most, if not one of the top successful movies, other, than the crime movies. The
Oh no, correcting for inflation, it's like the 6th top grossing film of all time.
Wow,
Still,
and certainly one of the most memorable. I mean,
yeah. Well, thank Mr. Spielberg. He's got like 5 of the top 10 films, unprecedented in the history of motion pictures.
wow, wow, wow. Well, it's kind of not easy to move on from there. I mean, it's what do you
Well,
do?
yeah, it then hung over my life forever. It became, I became the guy who wrote Jaws, and that's all that people wanted to talk about was the fish movie. Then I wrote a book about the experience, and the book became the best-selling book about the making of a movie ever.
Wow.
So whatever money I made from Jaws, I made from the book, not from being in the movie. Although it has generated nice residuals for the next 45 years.
Ah,
But you can't plan for that. Nobody plans to be in an iconic movie. I mean, it just happens. You can't. If I was going to pick scripts that I thought were going to be hits for the ages, I probably would not have picked either The Jerk or Jaws. But the audience has a way of telling us what's a hit. We don't tell them.
yeah, it's
They
kind of
tell
like what
us.
happened. It's kind of like what happened with Friends or Seinfeld. Both of those shows have, I
Yeah,
think,
exactly.
languished. I know Seinfeld languished the first year, and they were ready to dump it, and then they had some people behind it and said, let's let it go a little longer. And then I think in the second year, it really kicked in. And I think if you ask any of the people from Friends if they thought their show was going to be end up the way it was, I don't think any of them would have said for sure, no, it's going to happen. So you don't ever know.
You never know.
So what's going on? So you wrote this book, and how long ago did you write the book?
I wrote it the summer the Jaws came out,
Wow.
and it's been selling steadily ever since. And then I did a 25th anniversary edition and a 30th anniversary edition and a 40th anniversary edition.
Wow.
It's still in print. It's still out there. It sells steadily, and um, uh, I was able to do a lot of revisions to it. I updated it and put in stuff that I wasn't able to put in the first time around. So now it's kind of up to date, and it's got a lot of explanatory stuff in it. It's a pretty good book about the making of a movie, and like I say, to this day, it's the best-selling book about the making of a movie ever. So, you know, my place in history is secure.
Oh boy. I mean, who? Uh,
But at the time, nobody thought,
Unbelievable.
nobody knew, nobody thought.
Wow. So tell me about the last. Do you get a chance to relax and just kind of either do nothing or pick up a thing here or there? Tell me about the last 5 or 10 years. What that's been like for you.
Well, after a while, the industry changed drastically, and all of a sudden, uh, it used to be the hierarchy of things was television, was movies, then television, and then everybody realized, wait a second, everybody in television is making a lot more money than people in movies.
Wow.
So there was there's a fork in the road. Uh, in films, the director became God King. If you were a director of film, nobody wanted the writer even on the set. The director was everything. In television, it was the opposite. The writer is God King in television. He creates the show, and on a show like Seinfeld, by the time it gets to its third iteration in syndication, it's earning like $2 billion for
Wow.
Warner Brothers,
Wow.
and 50% of that goes to Larry David and the creators. So all of a sudden now television, everybody, people. So I had, like I said, I had a foot in both camps. I could write television, I could write movies, but I was being approached less, and um, it was just, I don't know. I just kind of, I don't want to say I lost interest, but I had done it all, and uh, movies were getting harder and harder to do, and all the money was in television. So I drifted into television, but the last 5-10 years, I've taken about once a year or so. I get hired to write a script. I don't get my quote anymore. I don't get what I used to get in the glory years. I do a lot of these shows. I do a lot of reminiscing about the good old days.
Well, is there anything you would have done differently? Do you ever say to yourself, I think I wish I would have turned to the right instead of to the left? Did you have a moment like that?
Yeah, the only decision that I would have made differently, that I even would consider making differently, was going to New York to do Saturday Night Live, but I didn't. And as it turns out, that was the right decision.
Sure.
So, no, I've it's not much that I regret. Most of the decisions I made turned out, luckily, to be the right decision. So, um, no regrets.
Well, I really, really appreciate you spending time with me, Carl. I loved hearing you and learning about your story and hearing the inside story with, my God, the Jaws and the Jerk. And I mean, where does someone learn about that? So I appreciate you sharing whatever you shared with us. I just want to thank you for this great show, but I really want people to know where to get that book. So if you can show that book fantastic. And where can people find that book and buy that book, Carl?
Okay, this is the Jaws log. This is the expanded edition. It's the 40th anniversary edition. It's got everything you need to know about the making of the movie and more. And it was written at first when the movie came out, and it was updated 2 or 3 times since then. And it is still the best-selling book about the making of a movie ever. So,
and where can they
all
find
your questions about the Fish movie are answered.
Right there. And where can they find the book?
You can find this book at Amazon.com, Alibris, any place books are sold, any bookstore. It's available in foreign translation. It's in the UK. Just Google Jaws log and follow the directions.
Great. Well, again, this has been fantastic. I want to thank you so much for your time and for sharing all that great information and knowledge, and just inspiring to know that someone can kind of, bounce from one thing to another, and all of a sudden to be asked by, before they're even known as the greatest director in the world, to be incorporated in with what they're doing, and so I congratulate you. You've obviously had a great life, and I appreciate you spending time with us here on the 80s Golden Age of Comedy.
Thanks, Bruce. See you another time.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
That was Larry Hankin.
Oh, Larry, I'm sorry. Yes, right. And he said you guys went down to Manhattan together. And
Oh yeah, we met in college at Syracuse University in 1958,
Yeah, really.
59.
Wow.
Then when we came to New York in 59, 60, we took an apartment together in Greenwich Village, and we're friends. He's the one who got me into improvisation, because he was at Second City, and then he got hired, and he was in the first company of the committee, and he suggested I come to San Francisco. They needed a stage manager, so I did that. And one thing led to another, and then that was my life.
Wow. Isn't that something, how somebody could make a suggestion and you just happen to be open at the right time at the right place, and it just, one thing leads to another.
Yeah, well, that's the story of my career.
So I have to tell you, well, you know what? Let's bring up, we haven't officially started the show.
Okay.
I have to, do a little bit of a hello and a little bit of an introduction.
Sure.
But
I'll wait.
Okay, but go away, Brady. Where are you? You're getting in the picture. Go away. We're on TV. Go away. Go lay down.
Cute dog.
Go away. There we go. Okay. So I'm not going to tell you Larry's funniest story about you and him. I'll wait till the show for that.